Double slit experiment. This was done in the early 1900s. Okay, 1912, 1914, 1915, you know, that sort of thing.
He already demonstrates he doesn't know what he's talking about. Young's double slit experiment was done in the 1800s. I want to say 1810. I think Mr. Campbell here smokes a lot of weed. He just comes off as a stoner to me a lot of times.
Is when quantum mechanics really was born. So it's the early 1900s.
Well, you know, that's true. That's kind of true, right? That was when quantum mechanics was born, but that's not when the double slit experiment was first done. It was done by a scientist by the name of Thomas Young.
So you see, we're almost 100 years away from that now.
We're actually more than 200 years away from the first double slit experiments.
Okay, and in the 5 or 10 years after these experiments were done, it's my opinion that physicists understood the nature of reality better then than they do now.
All right, I'm not going to play this whole video or talk over it or anything like that. This guy here's name is Tom Campbell. I learned about Tom about 3 years ago when I was doing a little research on quantum mechanics and you know, wanted a review of the double slit experiment. I came across this video here, and I started to learn about Tom Campbell. I mean, he's a quote-unquote physicist, evidently, that used to work for NASA. I don't know what he did for NASA. Maybe he mopped the floors. I don't know. And he wrote a book called My Big Toe, right? He's an author. And TOE is TOE, is short for his theory of everything. In short, Mr. Campbell is a proponent of the simulation hypothesis, or more simply put, that we live in a simulated, computer simulated reality, right? We're products of a computer simulation. I kind of gradually got into listening to Tom Campbell when I discovered him, because he seemed like he kind of had some knowledge, and his theories and ideas started out as interesting, but I quickly learned that he loves to hear himself talk. He often talks about his theory of everything as if once you understand that you live in a simulated universe, that suddenly everything becomes much simpler. Life in general becomes much more manageable, and he talks like a guru, basically, right? And like a cult leader who is building a cult. So, yeah, he's, you know, and he repeats a lot of the same garbage over and over and over and over and over again, and it's very long-winded. And basically, he's just trying to appeal to new age, hippy dippy, loony people that with some pseudoscience, pseudoscientific talk, pseudoscientific understanding of complex outcomes of a very simple experiment. The experiment itself, the double slit experiment, anybody can almost you can pretty much do it at home with some very very simple setups, but the results are mind bending when you really understand. And I'm not going to get into all of that, but one of the outcomes of this, especially on the internet and on the YouTube's videos regarding the double slit experiments, are people talking about observation and conscious observers and things like that, as if consciousness actually plays a role in the unveiling of the universe, the unraveling of the universe to us, right? The collapsing of the wave function, as it's called in quantum mechanics. Basically, Tom's theory, and it's not anything new, is that quantum mechanics exists, to save computing power, right? If you play a simulation game like, say, for instance, World of Warcraft, whatever, where you're an avatar marching through this world with a lot of other players, right? And they're marching through the same computer generated world as you. The computer doesn't generate the entirety of the world all the time. It just generates the pieces, the images that an observer needs. So when you're observing a particular location, the computer generates that location for you to see. And this is Tom's theory. I'm sure he came to this conclusion after smoking massive amounts of marijuana, probably because his eyes are always bloodshot. I guarantee you, this guy, he's either on some weed or some harder stuff, but he comes across as a stoner to me, like I said. But here's the deal. About 3 years ago, Tom he started it. He redesigned some of the he basically took the double slit experiment and put his own twist on it a little bit, and claimed that the outcome of his experiments could potentially provide definitive proof that we live in a virtual reality, right? Computer simulation. And so he put this out there to his Hippy Dippy cult following, and did a Kickstarter and raised close to $250,000 in order to do these quote unquote experiments that are really, in general have been beaten to death. And the overwhelming body of knowledge would tell you that the results that he's talking about, where consciousness actually playing a role in the double slit experiment, is stupid, right? It doesn't matter. But anyway, he got $250,000, and here we are 3 years later. And so he just gave an update on where the experiments stand yesterday. And this is his crack team. These guys all look like...
Here with Tom Campbell, author of My Big Toe, A Big Theory of Everything, and designer of several variations
this lady
of
here,
the classic double slit experiment,
Diane,
that he
appears in a lot of Tom's videos. I mean, I don't know if she's funding him or she's his manager or what, but or if they're in a relationship or what, I don't have a clue. But these two, Tom and her, are always talking about this hippy dippy stuff. And I don't know, I guess they're making a lot of money off of these people, man. This book, and probably donations and YouTube nonsense. And of course, probably living off to some extent the $250,000 that they pulled in on this scam. But these two guys down here below are the quote unquote physicists who are running the experiment for him. I guess this little setup back here on the table is I think that's his double slit experiment, that back there that they're working on. And I think these guys might be adjunct assistant professors or student interns or whatever. I don't think they're really on the cutting edge of quantum mechanics. I doubt very seriously. I think even Tom himself has said, in trying to get somebody to do the experiments, it was really difficult because every time he'd bring up the word consciousness, they would turn their backs on him. And he says it in a real condescending way, like, they don't know what they're talking about kind of attitude. But the reason that they don't pay him any attention, they're like, yeah, we're not going to get involved in this, is because they already know the outcome of these experiments. They know that it doesn't have any bearing. Consciousness doesn't have any bearing. If the which way path data is available, is sensed, if entanglement occurs, which is what sensing is, in any way, it doesn't matter if a conscious observer sees it or not, the wave function for the quantum particle collapses and it acts like a point, at that point, no pun intended. So doesn't matter if you see it or not, right? Doesn't matter if you close your eyes and don't look. It goes back to that old philosophical question of whether a light goes out when you close the refrigerator door, or whether if a tree falls in the woods, is there anybody there to hear it? Does it make any sound? Those kind of stupid questions, right? Um, so, and that's what this is all based on. It's a bunch of nonsense. But these guys are, getting paid from that $250,000 that they raised. The reason that big name, cutting edge physicists don't want to have anything to do with it is because they already know the answers. They don't want to be tied to this scam, right? They don't, when the scam unravels, and of course it's unraveling at the speed of a snail. Tom wants to drag this out forever because these experiments aren't going to prove anything. And I think maybe he didn't know that in the beginning. He had smoked a lot of weed and didn't know what was going on. Hadn't really studied it, but I'm sure that after he really got into it and physicists started really explaining to him, what he's talking about is stupid. Now I believe he pretty much knows that his experiments are stupid, but he's in too deep and he don't want to, return the money to the backers or anything like that. He's just kind of dragging it out for a long. Oh, this is really complicated stuff here. We're trying to shoot one photon at a time and blah blah blah. And all these guys have these shit-eating grins on their face, like the Cheshire cat, right? Like the cat that just ate the canary.
Is evidence
because they know they're a bunch of cons.
Tom's guests are part of his valuable research team for the experiments. Tom, if you would like to introduce your guests and discuss between yourselves the current status of the experiments or your experiment backers and audience.
This is the so he once every 6 or 8 months he puts out a video on what the status is. And keep in mind, this thing's been going on for 3 years now. The last video that he did was with this guy right here saying, hey, we finally found somebody to do it. And this was last year, right? And he was like, yeah, and we'll probably have some results possibly by the end of the summer. Well, now it is the following summer and they still don't have any results. They still don't have a working experiment, right? They're still quibbling over some sort of more sensitive photo multiplier or whatever to sense their photons that they're trying to shoot. They didn't know what they needed to begin with, and so
I'm sure it will be gratefully received. Tom?
Okay, well, first of all, what Donna has come into here is a weekly meeting that the research team has, every Thursday afternoon.
Good old Uncle Tom Campbell. Doesn't he remind you like an old drunk uncle?
And, we do this to keep up with what's going on, what the problems are, what we're doing to solve those problems, and so on. So Donna asked if she could jump into our meeting in the beginning and get a little update from the research team. So that's what we're going to do. Okay, down on my bottom left is Farbad Kashnud. He is the main researcher. He's the guy doing the work. He's getting the equipment, buying the equipment, putting it together, and trying to make it all work. And we've been doing this now for some months. Every
damn near a year since we found these guys.
That seems to be easy and cheap. But now let me put easy and cheap in quote marks because it hasn't actually been easy or cheap.
It hasn't actually been easy or cheap. That $250,000 that Tom Campbell earned when he was actually looking for less than half that. Let's take a look at this Kickstarter. Do we live in a virtual reality? Tom Campbell's got the answer, and he's asking the questions here, people. And look at this. He wanted $150,000. He got $236,590. I'm sure Kickstarter gets 10% of that or whatever, right? But still over $200,000. $50,000 more than what he was looking for to begin with. A huge amount of money to do a glorified version of the double slit experiment. Come on now, And he had like 5 different experiments, that he wanted to set up, basically to have a button in there so he could turn on or off, whether or not they know which way path data for the individual particles. and see if that made a difference on whether you got an interference pattern or a clump pattern. But this guy, evidently, to do all those experiments was just too hard for these two little brain children down here at the bottom. So this guy came up with another version of the experiment, which is just a watered down version, I guess, of the of the original.
So far, but it seemed to be easier and cheaper than the other, the other ones we had. We just needed a solid, standard double slit experiment, such that there was a separate
something you can do in your house, really.
Separate path for the which way data. That was the key idea. There's lots of ways of doing a double slit experiment, but they all don't end up with a unique which way data path that you can erase or not erase.
We're a bunch of gobbledygook.
Since we needed that, David came up with a simple one.
The California State Polytechnic University. Quantum entanglement. And
can't really even understand this guy, so I'm not going to listen to this.
Part is getting is not. We are learning results. We will get a result. So we know that we will get a
cheaper, but still really hard to do. So maybe I can show one very quickly, which is the one we aim to perform. I cannot share my screen right now. If you give me access, I'll do it.
All right, I surely will.
But in the meantime, I just want to say that one of the big challenge for people out there that are not really used to do optic experiments is that there are billions, if not trillions of photons all the time, all around us. And we are trying to do an experiment where we send one single photon at a time through a setup and then detect that photon, but also detect its entangled pair at the same time. So here we're talking about nanosecond scale and just detecting one photon out of trillions of photons all around us. So it's really hard. Even in a totally black room, we still get true spontaneous parametric.
So if anybody's interested, this is the setup that this guy's trying to use. Basically, he's got an on-off switch up here. It shows, that gives them the ability to either, erase the which way path data or not, right? And the reality is, if they can do this, right, what they're saying, and you still, whether or not you get a clump pattern or you get an interference pattern, it kind of would determine whether or not consciousness observes, or consciousness plays a role. Conscious observation plays a role in reality. Right. And of course, it does play a role in reality. It just doesn't necessarily play a role in the collapsing of the wave function. What you got is a photon coming through this BBO crystal, which creates two lower energy photons that are entangled. One photon takes the red path and the other takes the blue path, right? And then it gets reflected and either goes through slit A or slit B on the double slit. They got these polarizers here, which... he explains why they put this is polarized light, right? But the point being is, if if it's polarized horizontally or vertically, then you know which hole, which slit that the photon traveled through, and then a diagonal polarizer that erases that data and then just records the data, right? What I think the answer is that once you insert this BBO crystal, because this BBO crystal was used in the delayed choice quantum eraser experiment too, and they had weird results from that too. But once you insert this BBO crystal and you produce entangled photons, then at that point, the which way path data is known, or is in theory capable of being known, and and you get a clump pattern. So it has nothing to do with whether or not somebody actually observes it, right? But I think the problem goes as far back as the BBO crystal in trying to measure, the which slit path information. It's a complicated explanation, and I'm probably butchering it, but you can go and study this on your own. Long story short, the answer to Mr. Campbell here, his experiment is that has nothing to do with consciousness. That if the quantum particle entangles itself with another particle, then the wave function collapses and the particle then behaves like a particle, right? The wave function, it goes from being a wave to a discrete particle at that point. And that has nothing to do with observation, right? It has to do with sensing, or it just has to do with entangling that particle with another particle that already exists, right? Informationally. Meaning when you sense something, you shine a light on it, right? Yeah, you have to be able to see it, right? In order to see it, you shine a light on it. The light reflects off of it to your eye, and your brain interprets that. So when you shine a light on something, a particle of a photon interacts with it, or photons interact with it, and you undergo the wave function undergoes decoherence and collapses to a discrete point. So nothing is going to be gained from this experiment. $250,000 and a lot of time, and a lot of hippy dippies have been fooled, but it's entertaining to watch. So beware good old Uncle Tom and his big toe, because he's ready to put his big toe right up your big hind end. Y'all have a good one.